The rooftop restaurant in Accra looked beautiful, with a golden sun reflecting on the glass walls and a soft breeze carrying the scent of grilled fish and spices. The Mensah family sat around a long, elegant table, but behind the polite smiles, there was tension in the air. Amma, dressed neatly in a pastel dress, sat close to her husband Kwame, trying her best to look confident, yet she could feel every pair of eyes on her, studying her, judging her, as if she was an intruder in their perfect world. Kwame's mother, Madame Efua, sat at the head of the table, her jewelry sparkling, her face calm but unreadable. Next to her was Kwame's older sister, Adwoa, whose sharp eyes followed Amma's every move. She whispered something to her cousin and laughed softly, the kind of laugh that wasn't friendly at all. Other relatives, uncles, aunties, cousins, kept their smiles polite, but their eyes carried questions. To them, Amma wasn't yet part of the family. She was still being tested. The waiters moved around, serving fresh fruit and drinks, but Amma barely tasted anything. Her heart beat faster with each passing moment. She tried to join conversations, but somehow her words always met with silence or forced nods. Kwame squeezed her hand under the table, a small gesture of comfort, but Amma still felt outnumbered. Every smile seemed fake, every laugh seemed heavy with hidden meaning. Deep down, Amma knew this brunch wasn't just a family gathering, it was a silent judgment day for her. The brunch moved on slowly, plates of food coming and going, but the air around the table grew heavier. Amma tried to keep a soft smile, hoping to blend in, but her sister-in-law Adwoa wasn't about to let her have peace. With her arms crossed and a smirk playing on her lips, Adwoa tilted her head and looked Amma up and down. "That dress you're wearing," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's simple, very simple. I guess some people don't know how to dress for an occasion like this." Her words carried the sweetness of a compliment but the sting of a slap. The table went quiet for a second, then a few relatives chuckled nervously, glancing at each other as if they weren't sure whether to laugh or to hide. Amma's cheeks grew warm, but she kept her lips pressed into a gentle smile. She lowered her eyes to her plate, refusing to give Adwoa the satisfaction of seeing her upset. Adwoa wasn't finished. She leaned back in her chair, swirling the juice in her glass. "You know, sometimes I wonder where Kwame found you. I mean, women like us, we were raised to understand what it means to come from a respectable family. These days, though, some girls are just lucky. Very lucky." Her eyes locked onto Amma's, and the hidden meaning was clear. She was questioning her background, her worth, her right to sit at that table. Again the laughter came, thin, nervous, uncomfortable. An aunt cleared her throat and changed the subject, but Adwoa pulled it back. "Kwame has always been too kind. That's why I suppose he chose you. Not everyone gets this kind of blessing, right?" She smiled wickedly, like a cat playing with its prey. Amma felt her chest tighten. The words stung, but she refused to let them break her. She kept her back straight, her hands resting gently in her lap. Inside, she wanted to shout, to defend herself, to tell them she was not the woman Adwoa painted her to be. But she remembered her mother's voice. Dignity speaks louder than anger. Kwame shifted in his seat, about to say something, but Amma gave his hand a small squeeze under the table, silently telling him not to. She would not let this turn into a public fight. Her silence became her shield. Her calm face, her composed body, all spoke louder than any words she could have thrown back. The relatives noticed. While some nodded along with Adwoa's sharp comments, others glanced at Amma with a quiet kind of respect. She wasn't snapping, she wasn't breaking. She was simply absorbing the cruelty with grace. But beneath that calmness, a storm brewed. Amma knew Adwoa wanted to push her until she broke, and though she stayed silent, her heart whispered a promise to herself. One day they would see her true worth. The waiters placed steaming plates of jollof rice, grilled tilapia, and kelaweel on the table. The smell was rich and inviting, but Amma could hardly taste anything. She sat quietly, keeping her focus on her food, praying the meal would end soon. The earlier sly remarks still echoed in her head, but she tried to let them slide. For a moment, it seemed the conversation might drift away into lighter topics, until Adwoa decided she hadn't said enough. She leaned forward, her voice louder than before, making sure the whole table could hear. Honestly, let's not pretend here. We all know why Amma married Kwame. It's obvious she didn't come for love. She came for money. She's nothing but a gold digger. The words cut through the air like a blade. Gasps spread across the table. Forks froze halfway to mouths. And someone dropped a spoon onto their plate with a loud clang. Every pair of eyes turned toward Amma. Her chest tightened and her face burned with shame. She felt exposed, stripped of dignity in front of people who already doubted her. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the ground beneath the restaurant floor. Kwame immediately slammed his hand on the table. Adwoa, that's enough. Don't you ever talk to my wife like that. His voice was firm, angry, but it only added to the scene. Adwoa raised her eyebrows, pretending to look innocent. Oh brother, I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. Look at her. Do you really believe she's here for you and not for what you have? Some relatives shifted uncomfortably. A few whispered to each other, their eyes flicking between Amma and Adwoa. The whispers stung almost as much as the insult itself. Amma's throat ached, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She turned her head slightly, hoping her mother-in-law would step in, would say something to stop this cruelty. But Madame Efua sat still, her face unreadable. She tapped her fork gently against her plate, pretending to focus on her food. Not a word came from her lips. The silence was louder than Adwoa's insult. To Amma, that silence felt like betrayal. If Kwame's mother would not defend her, what did that mean? Did she secretly agree? The weight of the family's stares pressed down on her shoulders. She clenched her hands under the table to stop them from trembling. Kwame reached for her hand, whispering, "Ignore her, my love," but his words couldn't erase the humiliation. Amma forced a small smile, though her heart was breaking inside. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her shattered. But deep in her soul, something shifted. This was no longer just a family brunch. This was a battlefield. And though Amma sat in silence, her spirit burned with a vow. One day, she would show them all who she truly was. Amma kept her head bowed as the laughter and whispers circled around the table, but inside her mind, she drifted far away from that rooftop restaurant in Accra. The sting of Adwoa's words opened a door to memories she carried deep within her heart, memories of Cape Coast, where her story had begun. She saw her mother, Abina, again, her hands rough and calloused from years of scrubbing clothes for wealthier families. Day after day, her mother worked under the burning sun, carrying buckets of water, washing, ironing, just to put food on the table. Amma remembered those tired eyes that still managed to sparkle with love whenever they looked at her. "Amma," her mother would always say, "we may not have money, but we have dignity. Never let anyone take that away from you." Their home had been small, with walls that sometimes leaked when the rains came, but Amma had turned that little space into a place of dreams. Night after night, she studied under the weak light of a lantern, fighting off sleep while mosquitoes buzzed around her. She worked hard in school, not because success was easy, but because she knew it was the only way to rise above the struggles that tried to hold her family down. When money for her education ran low, Amma did not give up. She sold handmade bead jewelry in the market. She cooked snacks, meat pies and bofrot, and carried them in trays, walking through crowded streets, calling out to customers with a smile. Sometimes she would return home with aching feet and barely any profit, but she never stopped. Each coin she saved was a step closer to her dream of building a better life. Through all this, love was the last thing on her mind, until she met Kwame. He had not come to her life with riches or promises of wealth. He had come with kindness, respect, and a gentle laugh that made her feel seen in a world that often ignored her. Their connection was genuine, built not on what he owned but on who he was. Amma remembered the day he first visited her mother. They sat in that tiny home with its cracked walls. Yet Kwame never looked uncomfortable. He spoke to her mother with warmth, and Amma could see the hope in her mother's tired eyes. That was when she knew. This man loved her for her, not for appearances, not for what others expected. Now, sitting at the brunch table, hearing the word gold digger thrown at her like an arrow, Amma's heart ached with the weight of injustice. If only they knew the truth. She had not clawed her way out of poverty to steal from anyone. She had built her strength, her courage, her dignity, step by painful step. Her silence at that moment wasn't weakness. It was the calm of a woman who knew her worth. One day they would see it too. The main course was almost over, but the table no longer felt like a family gathering. It felt like a stage, and Amma was the target of the show. Adwoa leaned back in her chair, her voice sharper, her words more poisonous than before. "You see," she said loudly, pretending to speak to the whole family, "women like Amma know what they're doing. She didn't just marry Kwame, she married into an inheritance. She's here waiting for the day she can sit on what our family has worked for." A cold hush fell across the table. Some relatives tried to hide their shock, but others nodded slightly, as though Adwoa had only voiced what they had been thinking. Whispers spread like wildfire. Low murmurs exchanged glances, quiet gasps. It was as if the air itself had grown heavy, pressing down on Amma from all directions. Amma sat still, her back straight, her eyes lowered to her plate. Inside, her chest burned with pain, but her face stayed calm. She had learned long ago that silence sometimes spoke louder than words. Still, her silence did not protect her from the sting of their stares. Every glance felt like a question, every murmur felt like a knife. Kwame tried again, his voice tight with anger. "Adwoa, you're crossing a line. My wife doesn't care about money. She married me because she loves me." His words echoed with sincerity, but they seemed to bounce off the walls and fall flat. Adwoa only smirked, shaking her head. "Brother, you're blinded. Women like her are clever. They know how to play the part until the bank accounts are open." The words cut deep, not just into Amma, but into the entire room. Some relatives avoided looking at her, as if they were ashamed to be part of the cruelty. Others stared directly, curious, waiting for Amma to snap to fight back. But she didn't. She simply lifted her glass of water, took a slow sip, and placed it back on the table with steady hands. That silence unsettled everyone. It was not the silence of defeat, it was the silence of control. Yet Adwoa kept going, her voice rising. "Tell me, Amma, do you really think you can fool us? This family built its name long before you came. You can wear pretty dresses, sit at this table, but at the end of the day, you're just waiting for your share of what doesn't belong to you." The tension grew unbearable. The clinking of cutlery had stopped. No one touched their food anymore. Even the waiters paused at a distance, sensing the storm at the table. Amma sat there like a calm sea, but beneath her stillness, something powerful stirred. Her silence was not weakness, it was strength being tested. And though she did not yet speak, everyone at that table could feel it. Something was coming. Something that would change everything. The tension at the table was so thick it felt like the whole restaurant could feel it. Plates sat half-eaten, glasses untouched, and the air buzzed with whispers and hidden glances. Amma kept her composure, but inside, her heart raced. Then, just as the weight of Adwoa's last insult seemed unbearable, the sound of footsteps echoed across the rooftop. A tall man in a crisp navy blue suit walked in, his presence commanding attention immediately. His polished shoes clicked against the tiled floor, and the staff quickly straightened as if royalty had arrived. It was Mr. Owusu, the respected bank manager whose name carried weight across Accra. Conversations in the restaurant hushed. Even diners at other tables turned to see who he would approach. The Mensah family stiffened. Kwame frowned in surprise, but Adwoa's eyes lit up. She leaned forward with a smirk, whispering to her cousin, "You see, he must be here to discuss Kwame's accounts. Finally, the truth will come out." She folded her arms, looking smug, as if victory was already hers. Mr. Owusu approached the long table, his steps steady, his face calm but serious. The family members straightened in their seats, some quickly dabbing their lips with napkins, pretending to be at ease. Madame Efua adjusted her head wrap and gave a faint smile, clearly expecting this visit to highlight her son's importance. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Owusu said warmly, his deep voice carrying across the table. He shook hands with a few relatives, his charm undeniable. Then his eyes scanned the table, resting for a moment on Kwame before moving elsewhere. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Everyone assumed the same thing, that this visit was about Kwame's finances, perhaps a new business deal, perhaps an investment announcement. Adwoa leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smile on her face. "Well, this should be interesting," she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Amma to hear. Amma stayed silent, her eyes fixed on the man approaching. Her hands were folded neatly on her lap, but her mind raced. Why was he here? What did this mean? The atmosphere shifted completely. The cruel laughter and judgment from earlier had dissolved, replaced by curiosity and a nervous kind of anticipation. Even the relatives who had nodded along with Adwoa's insults now waited eagerly, eyes darting between Kwame and Mr. Owusu. Kwame gave his wife's hand a quick squeeze under the table, as if to reassure her, though his own heart beat fast with uncertainty. When Mr. Owusu finally stopped at their table, he smiled politely. "I apologize for interrupting your family gathering," he said, "but I have some important news to share." The family members exchanged looks, excitement flashing in their eyes. Adwoa smirked again, confident that this moment would expose Amma for who she believed she was. She had no idea the truth standing at the edge of that table was about to flip everything upside down. The rooftop was silent, every eye fixed on Mr. Owusu as he stood tall beside the table. The tension was so sharp it felt like even the breeze had stopped moving. For a moment, he looked around the family with a polite smile, then his gaze landed on Amma. He gave her a small respectful nod before speaking. "Mrs. Amma Mensah," he began, his voice steady but filled with admiration. "Congratulations! On behalf of the bank, I want to acknowledge you as one of the largest private investors in Accra." The words dropped like thunder, forks clattered against plates. A loud gasp escaped from one of the aunties, and someone nearly spilled their drink. Amma's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. She hadn't expected her business to be brought up here, not like this. But Mr. Owusu wasn't finished. He pulled out a leather folder, opening it with practiced ease. "Your portfolio continues to inspire many in our industry. Multiple successful ventures, real estate, logistics, and import businesses, all under your name. Your contributions have not only grown your wealth but created jobs for countless people in this city." The table froze. All those whispers, all those cruel jokes about her being a gold digger, melted into stunned silence. Adwoa's smirk cracked. She blinked rapidly, her face draining of confidence. For once, she had no words. Madame Efua's fork slipped from her hand and hit the plate with a sharp sound. Her eyes darted from Mr. Owusu to Amma, disbelief painted across her face. "Amma," she whispered softly, almost as if she couldn't trust her own voice. Relatives leaned in closer, staring at Amma as if she had transformed right before their eyes. Just moments ago, they saw her as an outsider clinging to Kwame for money. Now the truth shone like a mirror, exposing their prejudice. Amma had her own wealth, her own empire, something many of them could only dream of. Amma sat still, her calm composure never breaking. Inside, her heart raced with a mixture of relief and quiet triumph. She hadn't come here to boast, and she had endured their insults in silence. But now the truth was standing in front of them, undeniable and powerful. Mr. Owusu placed the folder on the table and looked directly at Adwoa. "There are very few women in this city who hold such a strong financial standing. Amma is not only one of them, she is leading the way. That is something to respect, not insult." The blow landed harder than any insult Amma had endured. Adwoa's mocking smile disappeared completely, her lips pressed tight, her eyes darting around as though looking for a place to hide. The room had shifted. The power no longer belonged to those who laughed, whispered, and judged. It now rested with Amma, the woman they underestimated. And for the first time since the brunch began, Amma lifted her head high and met their stares without fear. The silence after Mr. Owusu's words was thick, but it didn't last long. Adwoa suddenly leaned forward, her voice shaking with panic. "No, this can't be true. She's lying. She must have tricked you somehow." Her words cracked, louder than she intended, and heads turned sharply toward her. The confident smirk that had carried her all afternoon was gone, replaced with trembling lips and desperate eyes. Mr. Owusu remained calm, almost too calm, as if he had dealt with such protests many times before. He placed the leather folder gently on the table and opened it wider for everyone to see. "There is no trick here," he said evenly. "These are official documents, signed and stamped. Here you will find the records of her businesses, Ama Enterprises, Coastal Logistics, and Sunrise Imports, all registered under her name. You will also see her bank holdings, which place her among the top private investors in the city." Relatives craned their necks, some even standing from their chairs to peek at the papers. Their eyes widened as they read the figures, the company names, the stamps of approval. Murmurs of disbelief filled the air. "This can't be," whispered an uncle. "She's been doing all this quietly," said another, his tone laced with shock. Adwoa shook her head wildly, her voice cracking. "No, you're lying. This woman is pretending. She doesn't belong here. She can't be what you're saying she is." Her words grew frantic, her chest rising and falling quickly. The more she spoke, the weaker she sounded, her earlier arrogance crumbling piece by piece. Ama stayed still, her calmness shining brighter with every second Adwoa unraveled. She didn't need to argue. The truth was being spoken for her. And the contrast was striking. One woman drowning in shame, the other rising quietly in dignity. Kwame leaned forward, his voice firm. "Enough, Adwoa. You've done enough damage today." But Adwoa barely heard him. She buried her face in her hands, muttering, "This isn't possible. This isn't possible." The same relatives who had laughed at Ama earlier now avoided Adwoa's eyes, their discomfort written all over their faces. Mr. Owusu gently slid a few papers closer to Madame Efua. "Here, Mama. You can see for yourself." Madame Efua's hands trembled as she picked up the documents. Her eyes scanned the figures, the official seals, the undeniable proof. Slowly, her lips parted in shock. She lifted her gaze toward Ama, her face filled with a mixture of guilt and awe. Meanwhile, Adwoa sat frozen, her confidence shattered. The woman who had mocked Ama with cruel words only an hour ago was now the one being pitted. Her power, her pride, her arrogance, all stripped away in front of the very family she had tried to impress. For the first time that afternoon, the family saw the truth clearly. Ama was not the outsider, not the gold digger, not the lucky girl who stumbled into wealth. She was the strength, the success, and the dignity they had all underestimated. And Adwoa, once so loud, now sat in silence, drowning in her own shame. Madame Efua's hands shook as she held the papers Mr. Owusu had given her. She read line after line, her eyes widening with every figure, every company name, every stamp of approval. For so long she had believed the whispers, allowed Adwoa's voice to shape her opinion of Ama. She had doubted her, kept silent when she was insulted, and watched her suffer without a word of defense. But now the truth sat heavy in her hands, undeniable and powerful. Her chest tightened with guilt. She looked up slowly, her eyes finding Ama's calm face. Ama sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. She hadn't shouted, hadn't cursed, hadn't defended herself with anger. She had carried the humiliation with dignity, waiting for truth to speak for her. That dignity pierced through Madame Efua's heart more than any words could. Tears stung her eyes as she pushed back her chair. The entire table watched in silence as she stood and walked toward Ama. Every step felt heavy, but it was a step she knew she had to take. When she finally reached her, she placed a trembling hand on Ama's shoulder. "My daughter," Madame Efua's voice cracked, filled with emotion. "I was wrong." Her words rang out across the table, making every relative sit straighter. "I allowed myself to doubt you. I stayed silent when I should have defended you. And for that I am deeply sorry. You are not only my son's wife. You are my daughter. You are part of this family, and I am proud of you." Gasps filled the air, followed by claps from a few relatives. Slowly, more joined in, until the table echoed with applause. The same people who had looked at Amma with suspicion were now applauding her strength and success. Kwame squeezed Amma's hand tightly, pride shining in his eyes. But Amma herself could hardly breathe. The sting of the insult still lingered, but this moment, the moment her mother-in-law embraced her, washed away the bitterness. Madame Efua leaned down and hugged her, pulling her into a tight embrace. Amma closed her eyes, and for the first time that day, she let herself breathe freely. Adwoa, however, sat frozen in her chair. Her face burned red as the family clapped and smiled at Amma. The woman she had tried to destroy now stood in victory, while she was left in silence. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. The very stage she had used to humiliate Amma had now become the stage of her own downfall. The applause grew louder, the air filling with warmth instead of tension. Amma's pain had turned into triumph, her silence into power. She hadn't needed to shout, hadn't needed to fight with insults. Truth had spoken for her, and now even the ones who doubted her were cheering her on. It was the turning point she never expected. From humiliation to honor, Amma had risen, and no one at that table would ever forget it. The applause slowly faded, but the air was still charged with emotion. Amma rose from her chair, her pastel dress catching the soft light of the evening sun. Her face was calm, but her eyes glowed with strength. She looked around the table at every relative, the same faces that had mocked her, doubted her, whispered behind her back. Now those same eyes could not meet hers. She took a deep breath, her voice steady but filled with power. "Respect," she said clearly, "is not bought with money. It is earned by truth. And today the truth has spoken for me." Her words carried across the rooftop, echoing louder than any insult that had been thrown her way. Some relatives shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded, humbled by her grace. Kwame stood up beside her, his hand finding hers. Together they faced the family, united. Amma didn't need to say more. Her silence, her dignity, and her strength had already told the whole story. With her head held high, she turned toward the exit. Kwame walked with her, his grip strong, as if to remind her she was never alone. Behind them, the family sat frozen, their voices lost, their pride shattered. Adwoa lowered her eyes, unable to lift her head. Madame Efua watched Amma leave, tears in her eyes, knowing she had almost lost the chance to see her daughter-in-law's true worth. As Amma stepped out of the restaurant, the evening breeze brushed her face. For the first time that day she felt free. She had walked into the brunch humiliated, judged, and unwanted, but she was leaving honored, respected, and victorious. What was meant to break her had only made her shine brighter. Her humiliation had turned into her greatest triumph.